anybody who's coming on from Facebook. And if you weren't with us last week, we actually finished up our class with a little snippet, with a little video from our classic, The Godfather, which actually was the last few minutes of the movie, The Godfather, which shows Michael Corleone establishing himself as the head of the family and basically eliminating the other family heads and taking care of business, taking care of rivals, which of course is and traitors, which is a big part of what Solomon does when he takes over. David warns him at least to do so. He hasn't done it yet, but he's going to do it. And to some extent, as we're about to see, what makes Solomon king is establishing his power and eliminating rivals. You could also say establishing power by eliminating rivals. We know nothing about Solomon's capabilities. We know nothing about Solomon's childhood background. We don't know anything other than he's not the oldest son. All we know, we don't know anything about Solomon other than because he's not mentioned at all up until now, other than he was born. So we don't know anything about Solomon's capabilities. The only thing that we read last week was that King David had promised Bathsheba that he would make Solomon the king, in a conversation that we hadn't heard up until that time. It had not been put into the biblical text. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just doesn't mean, it means we just never read it. And as we speculated last time, maybe David said that to all the ladies, that he was queen, that were his queens. But we do know that several of David's sons had already made themselves unelectable. Well, they're dead. So that's a great way of taking yourselves out of contention. But of course, Amnon and Absalom are both dead, two of the heir apparents. Adoniah, who is older, we had seen had kind of made himself king before David was dead, and that upset the inner circle. It definitely upset Solomon's party. And so David made him non-eligible and essentially made himself made Solomon king before he died. And so what we read last week was David basically saying in a very nice way, hey, I'm going to die. He tells Solomon, you're taking over. And what you got to do is you got to follow the rules. You got to follow the Torah. And it's a beautiful text. I mean, keep charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and following his mitzvot, following the commandments and the teachings of the Torah. Kakatuv b'Torah. It actually says, it's written, as recorded. So whatever that book looked like at the time, there is something that we can say that David had said to Solomon, or at least the person who wrote this, even if it was written 200 years later, 300 years later, it's possible. Somebody had envisioned that existed already. And at least again by 2600, before the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, something was referred to as the teaching of Moses, because almost everyone is in agreement. I'm saying biblical scholars all in agreement, almost virtually in agreement, that this text right here was written before the destruction of the temple. And that means that there is an understanding that the ruler, that the king, is accountable to a higher power, not just to God, but to a text, to a law. And that's pretty significant, because at an early time in Jewish history, we understood that our leaders were accountable to the law and not to their own whims and not to their own personal decisions, which again, literally at this time, up till, through absolute monarchies, the state was the king, as King Louis XIV famously said, "I am the state." The Torah, was the highest authority, and even the king was accountable to that. And so this is pretty significant it's pretty significant that Judaism has this tradition. I will say this because people have asked me, and I've been asked by several people about what's going on right now in Israel. Some of you heard yesterday that Israel is basically now dissolved its parliament and is now going to head to the 5th election in 3 years, which is horrible, and it's not what Israel wanted to do. But it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that this was going to happen from the minute the coalition took power a year and a half ago, was that Israel had a coalition government this last year, which was basically based on the fact that the only thing the people who were part of the coalition agreed on is they didn't want Netanyahu to be prime minister. So you had people from the far left and the far right that were part of a coalition that basically said, we just don't want Netanyahu in power. And you can't really have a government that's all they agree on. They did pass a budget, which was significant, but they could not agree on anything. And again, it would be like people in America, if you had a government that included the far left and the far right, and the center was essentially kind of not allowed to participate, which, listen, let's be honest, to some extent, that's what happens in this country as well. We know that there's a middle ground in America, a common sense center, which is almost always ignored when it comes to what we like to see happen with lots of things, whether it's abortion policy, gun control, common sense, I would say common sense gun control, all of these things that we know there's a consensus on in this country. 70% even, some people say in some cases, and we can't reach it. So the fact that Israel can't reach it in a parliamentary system, let's be a little careful to make fun of those systems. But yeah, I mean, it's a problem. The Likud party, which has the most seats in the Israeli Knesset, has been out of power over this last year. And if they're the largest party and more people have voted for Likud, but their parliament members don't have a seat in the Knesset, that's a problem. So yeah, it's kind of a mess. It's been a mess in Israel for the last few years politically. And there is a common consensus in Israel. There is a center, probably again, we consider a center-right government that could exist. But again, the problem is it would be led by Netanyahu, and he's a polarizing figure. So look, I don't know what's going to happen. Israelis don't know what's going to happen. I talked to some friends this week in Israel, and they have no idea what's going to happen. And they're pretty sensible people. They're not, politically agitating, and they're not irrational. They're fairly pragmatic people. They don't know what's going to happen. So I don't know what's going to happen. We're obviously paying attention to it, but nobody knows. And there won't be new elections until October. So nothing's going to be solidified at least till after the high holidays. So yeah, but we understand, and Israel understands, that there is a higher rule of law. There's a there are rules in Israel. There's a Supreme Court of Israel, and there is a sense that you can't let one person make the laws, which is essentially why Netanyahu was not in power over the last year, as people felt he had been corrupted, and he had taken power in ways that shouldn't have happened. So if you want to know why there were Israelis who were not happy with Netanyahu, because he exceeded his authority and did things which maybe in America wouldn't even be considered illegal, but in Israel, they were considered illegal, including accepting gifts, which in Israel is a serious offense. So just so you know, I mean, Israel in its history, they bounced out Rabin as prime minister in the 70s because he had bank accounts in the United States. I mean, that's a fact. So Israel is pretty strict when it comes to these things. It doesn't mean that there haven't been serious violations, but Israel is pretty strict when it comes to corruption and the sense that people are being bought off. And let's look
Mark,
at how that. Yeah.
Is the election not occurring until October? Is that related to the high holidays because of the religious right?
Well, it's not the religious right. It's just the understanding that you got summertime, which is not a time when they can really get people to focus on the election. When they have to give a couple months anyway. So they'd have to give whatever it is, a 60 or 90 days period of having people file and do those kinds of things.
Right.
So that would be number one. And so that would put it into late September.
Anyway.
And then they won't do it during the holiday period. So that's why. Yeah. So it is because of the holidays and because for, we know that there's a lot of holidays in September, October time in the Jewish community. We know, like, and unless you're a rabbi or, very involved in synagogue, you're just like, oh yeah, there's a lot of holidays for a couple of weeks. You have to understand in Israel, they're all national holidays, right? Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, everything's shut. Everything is shut during the holiday, the first two and last two. Sukkot is shut, right? So essentially in Israel, and again, depending on whether it falls on the weekend, which oftentimes it does, at least one of the days, you essentially, no matter what, will have, literally 7 days in September, October time that are holidays. You can imagine what it would be like. We have some times when we have we'll have what do we have? We have like Veterans Day and Thanksgiving will be within a couple of weeks of each other, right? And then like a month later, it's Christmas, and we think, oh, the holiday times. But you imagine 7 days when every bank, every school, everything is closed during the period of literally 2 weeks, right? Because from the first day of Rosh Hashanah until the last days of Sukkot, you're talking like 3 weeks, right? So you're talking about 7 days gone off the calendar. So you can't really do work. And even if you're not religious, you have to do, those are national holidays. So yeah.
That happened when I was a senior in high school. I missed 7 days, the way everything fell. It was like a Tuesday and a Wednesday or a Wednesday and a Thursday. And I just wasn't there. And it was very strange to just say, yeah, no, I'm not here again. No, yeah. I'm not here again.
If you're in that situation.
And that was a Jewish neighborhood, not a Jewish neighborhood, but it was 50%. I mean,
if you're ever in a situation like that, you do feel it. But again, in Israel, you just don't, you're not working then. And so that's why there's no elections until after middle of October. Again, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, my hope is that there's they can reach some kind of settlement with what they're going to do with Netanyahu in the next 3 months, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen either. That trial seems to be dragging on forever. So, I don't think there's going to be an answer. Anyway, so back to our text, we've got, we've had a Jewish tradition to uphold the law. And what's interesting, of course, is that upholding the law doesn't prevent Solomon from knocking off a few people, which we're going to see today. So the setup was last week. The actual death is going to happen now. And again, all of this is happening during Solomon's first days in office as king. And what also we're going to read about is that Solomon has this exceptional responsibility of holiness, not just as king, but what he's going to do as king, what his first actions are going to be. But what we're going to read today is really about Solomon. And this is our first introduction really to him. This is the first time we're going to hear his voice. This is the first time we're going to see him in action. We're going to see him actually doing stuff. And, look, we all, maybe, I don't know, we all, but many of you might have some conceptions of who Solomon was. You might have had some imagination of who King Solomon was. We know he's very wise. We know he has a lot of wives. Some of you might know that he built the temple, but you probably don't know Solomon. So let's take a look at who Solomon was. And so what we finished off right here is David's final words to Solomon. Take care of these people. Remember Yoav, remember what he did. He killed people. Remember Shimei, this guy who, insulted me when I came out of Jerusalem. And he says, don't let these people go unpunished. And then it says, David died. He was buried. He was buried in the city of David, which is, it's Jerusalem, but it's the part of Jerusalem that he kind of made his personal capital, which is the fact that Jerusalem was called Ir David. I mean, that's what it says right here, the city of David. So 40 years is obviously a pretty symbolic time, but it's not a full 40 years in Jerusalem. 7 years of it were in Hebron, in the tribe of Judah, the kingdom of Judah, and then 33 years in Jerusalem itself. And here's where we take off. Solomon sat upon the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. So if Rosemary, if you continue with today's reading.
Adoniah, son of Haggith, came to see Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. She said, "Do you come with friendly intent?" "Yes," he replied, and he continued, "I would like to have a word with you." "Speak up," she said. Then he said, "You know that the kingship was rightly mine, and that all Israel wanted me to reign. But the kingship passed on to my brother. It came to him by the will of the Lord. And now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." She said, "Speak up."
So Adoniah is the older brother, right? He's the one who, at least according to him, the kingship was his by birth. But he also says that Israel wanted me to reign, which is the feeling that he has, that not only did he deserve it by birth order, but he was popular, that he had the popular will of the people behind him. That's what he said. I mean, look, we don't know, but we do know that he started doing things before David was dead that seemed to indicate that he had the ability to do that. He comes to his stepmother, Bathsheba, who is now at this point the queen mother, and says to her, "I want to talk to you." Now, this is important for several reasons, but let's keep in mind that as he's talking to her, she might be his age. So when she said, I point this out, when she says to him, "Speak up," it's probably not because she's hard of hearing. That's probably not what it means. Again, Bathsheba could be the same age as Adoniah, probably not younger than Adoniah, but could be maybe 5 or 10 years older, but not like within the realm where they're not roughly equals when it comes to age. So this is not like he's coming to some old lady. I only point that out because the speak up part is probably has a connotation that you might have that probably shouldn't be there. Just curious, Mary, what does the King James have for speak up? You have that there?
I do. It says "say on."
Yeah, I like that a little bit better, which is say on means, hey, get to it, right? That's the way I would translate it is, yeah, your point, what do you want? That's what she's really saying to him, not speak up.
I was taking it as, permission to speak freely, and she's saying, "Go ahead."
Yeah, I just want to make it real clear that the speak up is not some old lady going, what? I can't hear you, boy. It's not that. It's okay. What do you want? Okay, I hear you. Yeah, you can speak. That's fine. Yeah, go ahead. But I like more get to the point. What are you really here to ask for? Because she knows he's there to ask for something.
Right.
Well, let's make a real important point though. Notice here that Adoniah does not go to Solomon to ask for what he's about to ask for. He goes to Bathsheba. So that indicates a couple of things. First of all, that she has tremendous power. It also might give us a little sense of what he's about to ask for. But it is significant that he comes to her. And he also comes to her with not so much a threat, maybe it is a threat, but a little bit of a statement of, look, this kingship could have been mine. And of course, it reminds us that, he's the son of Haggit, his mother. His mother, has had a relationship with King David before Bathsheba ever got in the picture. Look, I never had this experience with my stepmother, but my stepmother is about 12 years older than me. She's not exactly my age, but she's close. But if I had been in a situation where, let's say, my brother got something that I felt I should have had, and I went to see her, I could have understood this situation a little bit, which is for Adoniah, this is kind of humiliating that he has to ask for anything, because from his standpoint, he should be the one in power. And so this is a very, very dramatic and
he's having to ask for something from a woman.
yeah, and this is why what he asks for is so significant, why he asks for a woman for this. So she says to him, okay, go on, what do you want?
He replied, please ask King Solomon, for he won't refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as wife. Very well, said Bathsheba, I will speak to the king in your behalf. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him about Adoniah. The king rose to greet her and bowed down to her. He sat on his throne, and he had a throne placed for the queen mother, and she sat on his right.
Yeah. Okay. For those who don't remember, Abishag is the woman who was placed with King David towards the end of his life as a comfort. Not exactly a wife, but she should have been. She was fulfilling those needs for King David at the end of his life that his courtiers at least felt he would make him happy. So I told you that this woman, Abishag, ends up being very critical. She comes back into the picture. This young woman who, from the looks of it, is not going to have that big of a role, shouldn't have had that big of a role in history, shouldn't have even known her name. But she winds up being pretty critical. Now, even if you've never read this story, you can probably understand that this is about to get very, very, very important. But let's point out a couple of things. First of all, the Bible had told us just a few weeks, 2 weeks ago, we read this, when we read the very end of the book of Samuel, that King David was not intimate with Abishag. Now, we know that. We read it. We know it. Somebody knew it. Somebody knew it. And it was critical for them to tell us this, because to some extent, what they're saying is that she was somewhat available from the standpoint of she's still a virgin. Put that in quotes. But not everybody knows that. And not everyone should assume that. And if Adoniah knows that King David, his father, never slept with her, and we already, by the way, know she's beautiful, by the way. There's no question. The way it was described is she's like the most beautiful woman in the country. So Adoniah is basically saying, look, I didn't get to be king, but give me Abishag. Give her to me. And of course, he says to Bathsheba, he won't say no to you. Your son won't say no to you. So that's part of the reason that he went to her. But also think about it. What did Abishag represent for Bathsheba? She was an embarrassment to Bathsheba to some extent. I mean, we know that. Remember, Abishag is in the room when Bathsheba comes to see him at the end of his life and say, hey, when she makes her pitch for Solomon, Abishag is sitting in the room with her husband. We said this. I mean, what's going through Bathsheba's head while she sees this woman, this young, beautiful woman, sitting in the bedroom of her husband while she's asking for her son to be king? The dynamics of that meeting. And so, it's possible that Adoniah is saying, well, look, Bathsheba doesn't want this Abishag woman hanging around. She's an embarrassment. Nobody wants to see her. Nobody wants to hear from her. Let me have her. I want to have her. I don't know what to say. I don't know what Adoniah was thinking. He clearly didn't seem to be thinking. And we also know that, I will point out for you this word, that it says Queen Mother, Em HaMelech, the mother of the king. The Queen Mother is a wonderful translation because this almost seems to be a title. Em HaMelech seems to almost not just be like, a description, but a title. And it says that she had a throne. Now, the word kiseh can also mean chair, but because it's used for throne all the time, and this is an area where it's very possible that it was a throne, that she had her own throne. Now, it doesn't seem like the throne is always necessarily there, because it says he sat on his throne and he had a throne placed for the Queen Mother. Now, was that saying he had it set for her when she came in? Like now she's there and he brought it out. Or it's possible from the Hebrew that she sat on the throne that she always sat on, and that she had a throne there next to him all the time. It's possible that when it says, and he had a throne placed for the Queen Mother, and she sat on his right, it's not talking about this moment that Adoniah came, but that the throne he had placed for her wasn't just there that day. It's a possibility. But we know that she is there when Adoniah comes in. When she's talking to her about Adoniah. Adoniah is not here. Let's actually see what King Solomon's response is, or what she says to him. Let's say that.
She said, I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me. He responded, ask, mother, I shall not refuse you. Then she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to your brother Adoniah as wife.
So let's see the dynamics of this. So she says to her son, I have one small request. Do not refuse me. She does say the words, do not refuse me. Ask, mother, I shall not refuse you. That's what he says. And he says, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to your brother, Adoniah, as a wife, by the way, not just given to her, but as a wife. That's what she asked. So she says, it's a small thing. Don't refuse me. And he says, I won't refuse you.
The king replied to his mother, why request Abishag the Shunammite for Adoniah? Request the kingship for him. For he is my older brother, and the priest Abiathar and Joab, son of Zeruiah, are on his side.
And so Solomon responds to his mother, why just ask for this? Why don't you just say he should be the king? Now, of course, we know she wanted him to be the king, so she doesn't want him not to be king. She's the one who advocated for him to be king. But Solomon says everything in this line. you might as well ask for him to be king. You might as well make him king if he takes Abishag. So if he takes Abishag, then he solidifies his claim for king because he's already my older brother. And he already still has the support of Abiathar as a priest, and Yoav, the head of my father's military, are still on his side. They're just waiting for me to screw up. They're just waiting for an opening for them to take power. So if I give him Abishag, he's gonna be king. Let's finish this.
Thereupon King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, so may God do to me, and even more, if broaching this matter does not cost Adonijah his life. Now, as the Lord lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of my father David, and who has provided him with a house as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death this very day.
Yeah. And so remember, Adonijah got called in by Solomon when Solomon was made king. Solomon warned him. He said, "You don't screw up. I'm going to let you live, but you already started taking power when our father was getting old. You know, he kind of threatens him and says, he doesn't kind of, he threatens him and says, you know, you screw up and you're dead." He basically said, by all rights, I have the ability to kill you now, but I'm not going to, but don't screw up, because if you do screw up, I'll kill you. And now Solomon has said, you screwed up. He doesn't say it. He says it to his mom. He says, by God, he's done. He's dead. And he says, God has given me this kingdom. God has put me on the throne. And Adonijah is jeopardizing God's plan. And so he says, I am going to kill him, or I'm going to have him be killed today. It's over. So this is the pretext that Solomon uses to get rid of Adonijah. It's a serious thing. I mean, what did Adonijah think would happen with this? I mean, did Adonijah seriously try to push his buttons to see if he could get away with this?
Maybe they baited him into it because they wanted a pretext.
Could be. You know, did somebody
Somebody, planted the idea in his head and said, they'll let you do it.
Yeah, I mean, Adonijah had to, at some point when he thought about this, know that he was risking this, though, because he knew who Abishag was. He knew what she represented, because again, having your father's concubine is essentially saying, I have my father. Remember, Absalom did that when he took over. He took all of David's concubines that were left in Jerusalem and he slept with them up on the roof, so everybody knew it. And so, I mean, that just happened. I mean, not just happened, but it happened in David's lifetime. So the role that women played in the kingship was very important, not only as the queen mother, as we see, and who your mother is, but also who you're sleeping with. And if you're sleeping with a woman who was sleeping with the king, you're to some extent the king. So he just crossed the line. And Adonijah, his older brother, has just been sentenced to death. And again, is this legal? I don't know. I mean, he swore an oath that he was going to kill him if he got out of line. He got out of line. Is there any Torah law that would allow this to happen? No.
What do the rabbis say about it?
No.
I thought you weren't supposed to sleep with the wife of your father.
Correct, but he never slept with her. That's the gray area on this, which is David never slept with Abishag. He never consummated the marriage. So the problem is that this seems to be, look, you can make the argument Solomon doesn't have a choice, that he has to send this message. But, the writers of this know, I would say the writers of this know that it happened, right? And so how it happened, whether there was some push behind him that Adoniah had, but maybe Yoav and Abiathar said, hey, let's see if Solomon's stupid enough to do this. And again, was this behind, what was the thing that we don't see? The fact, look, it is hinted at, which is when Solomon says Abiathar and Yoav are already on his side, the possibility of a coup is very real. How real was it? Was this Adoniah's opportunity to see if he could pull off a coup? Right? Is Adoniah essentially pressing the buttons here too, to some extent, with saying, I know that this is going to cause everything to rise to a head. So let's see who in the inner circle is going to back us up. And let's see how effective Solomon is. I mean, to some extent, Adoniah is saying, look, I'm dead one way or the other, but let's see if I can play this out. Let's see if I can actually take over. Let's see if when all this gets thrown in, let's see what happens. I mean, Adoniah could have said, look, unless I run away, I'm just biding my time, waiting for the other shoe to fall, and I'm going to be dead anyways. Solomon can come up with a pretext to kill me any day. So let's see right now if I can pull off a coup. So maybe the coup was already there. There were already people in the inner circle that Solomon says, I'm worried about it. He said, there are already people conspiring against me. And they're high up people. They're people that everybody knows. So it could be that Adoniah was going to see what happens when the chips fall, right? Well, here's how they fall.
And Solomon instructed Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, who struck Adoniah down, and so he died.
Yeah, so he's dead, done. Adoniah is done. And Benaiah, his guy, his general, killed him. So Solomon doesn't kill him with his own hands. He has Benaiah do it. But Benaiah is his enforcer. Benaiah is his Yoav. But let's see, because you can see that this is not about just Adoniah. Because look what happens next.
To the priest Abiathar, the king said, go to your estate at Anatot. You deserve to die, but I shall not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of my Lord God before my father David, and because you shared all the hardships that my father endured. So Solomon dismissed Abiathar from his office of priest of the Lord, thus fulfilling what the Lord had spoken at Shiloh regarding the house of Eli. Yeah,
and so Abiathar, as we talked about, had been one of David's loyal followers early on. He survived the Saul's purge of the priests of Nob, who are descendants of Eli, who was again Samuel's mentor. Eli was the priest, was the high priest at Shiloh, when the temple, before the temple existed, when there was just a tabernacle. Shiloh was the place. Eli and his family were in charge. They all, they did bad things. Hophni and Pinchas, his son, do bad things, and the other family members essentially get the priesthood pulled away from them. And that's why it just reminded us here that God had condemned Eli and his family, even though he was at one point a great guy. His family is now with Abiathar out of office, done. And again, throwing out a priest, the high priest, was a big deal. Now, we already know that Solomon had made Zadok co-high priest, so it's not like there's not a person to take over. We know who's taken over. But getting rid of the high priest was a pretty big deal. And he says to him, by all rights, I could kill you right now too. You're part of this coup. And that's why we know that this is a coup. This is not, an aborted coup. This is a coup that didn't happen, because it's not just Adoniah that gets there's an accounting for, it's the other people here. So we read about Abiathar. He doesn't kill him, which is probably a smart thing to do, right? You don't want to kill the priest, because priests are religious leaders, right? These are not people who, you don't want to kill the guy working for God. And Solomon says that. You worked for God. You took care of the ark. And so he says, maybe better not to kill that guy. We'll just throw him out of office. We'll exile him. You won't see him anymore. He's done. You will never see him on TV again. So he's off. But you don't kill him because he's a man of God. Not so with the other person that we read about.
When the news reached Yoav, he fled to the tent of the Lord and grasped the horns of the altar, for Yoav had sided with Adonijah, though he had not sided with Absalom. King Solomon was told that Yoav had fled to the tent of the Lord and that he was there by the altar. So Solomon sent Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, saying, "Go and strike him down."
Yeah, so here it's quite clear that this is, again, a coup. When it says that he sided, that Yoav also sided with Adonijah, it means that he had picked the wrong side. Picked the wrong side. It reminds us he didn't side with Absalom. He was not on that wrong side, but he's on the wrong side now. And he's on the side of Adonijah. Adonijah had co-conspirators, Abiathar and Yoav. And Yoav knows he's dead now because his protection is gone. Whoever was going to side with these guys, whatever other popular support there existed, whatever other courtiers had said to Adonijah and Yoav and Abiathar at the time, I'm on your side, then it doesn't materialize. Whatever happens here, Yoav is kind of on his own. And so Yoav does what most people would say, I'm going to go to the only place that I can be safe. I'm going to find sanctuary. I'm going into the tabernacle. I'm going into the tabernacle, the Ohel, the tent of God. And I'm going to go into the altar and I'm going to grab the horns of the altar. I'm going to hold on to it because nobody can go in there and kill somebody. It's a pure place. You can't kill anybody in the holy temple. And it's not the temple yet, but the tabernacle, the holiest space where God is. You can't kill anybody there. Solomon says to his enforcer, to his blood, to his
Hitman
of death, this great, and he was a soldier in David's time too, right? Benaiah, the head of his guard. He says, go in there and kill the guy. Kind of matter of factly, go and strike him down. Same words, go and kill him. Go and kill him. Now, again, people ask, what did the rabbis say about this, right? How is this okay? Well, let's read what happens.
Benaiah went to the tent of the Lord and said to him, "Thus said the king, come out." "No," he replied, "I will die here." Benaiah reported back to the king that Yoav had answered thus and thus.
Yeah, so Benaiah initially says to him, get out, come out of there, get out. And Yoav says, no. Essentially, he says to him, if you want to kill me, you got to come in here. I'm not going to come out.
Come out with your hands up, come in and get me.
No, he says, and again, he's literally saying, if you want to kill me in the tabernacle, you come in here. And so Benaiah goes back to Solomon. What do you want me to do? Right?
And the king said, do just as he said. Strike him down and bury him and remove guilt from me and from my father's house for the blood of the innocent that Yoav has shed. Thus the Lord will bring his blood guilt down upon his own head, because unbeknown to my father, he struck down with the sword 2 men more righteous and honorable than he, Abner, son of Ner, the army commander of Israel, and Amasa, son of Yeter, the army commander of Judah. May the guilt for their blood come down upon the head of Yoav and his descendants forever. And may good fortune from the Lord be granted forever to David and his descendants, his house and his throne. So Benaiah, son of Jehoiada went up and struck him down, and he was buried at his home in the wilderness.
Uh-huh. And so Solomon's response, and again, one of the traditional outs on here, because again, there's a problem with Yoav, which is that Yoav was very loyal to King David, very loyal to King David. Maybe you can make the argument the most loyal to King David. But his loyalty meant that Yoav would kill anybody who he felt was a threat to David, and again, to some extent to himself. Because when Amasa is made the general in his place after the Absalom revolt, this was against Yoav. This really wasn't against David. You can't make the argument anymore that Yoav is just working for David. And so Yoav, David's cousin, which means, of course, he's also Solomon's cousin, is killed at Solomon's order. And Benaiah literally goes into the tabernacle and kills him. You can make the argument, like, how can that even be allowed? How can a king order the tabernacle to be violated this way? How could that place not be free from violence? And so this is a problem. I mean, Yoav counted on the fact to some extent that, he was going to find some kind of peace there, maybe. It was a risk. I mean, he really didn't have much of a choice of where he could go for safety, but he tries. And Solomon showed right now here the level of violence that he's willing to go through in order to be king. Because initially, Solomon kind of says, look, let's see what happens. I don't have to kill people yet, but he just killed people. He killed the people that his father had warned him about, and they're dead. Now, David never told Solomon, go kill your brother Adoniah. He never said that. But in the back of David's mind, did he not think that that was going to happen to some extent? I don't know. Maybe he hoped it wouldn't happen. Maybe Solomon hoped it wouldn't happen, but it just happened. Solomon just purged everybody, almost everybody, that he needed to. And Benaiah is his hitman. Benaiah is the one who kills everybody. He does it. So Solomon says, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take away the guilt on our house that Yoav had brought onto us by killing people like Abner and Amasa. I'm going to fix this. And so this is his out. Solomon knew the history. Everybody knows the history. Everybody knows what Yoav did. They know that Yoav was this loyal, lifelong friend and confidant of David. But David told Solomon, this guy is a murderer. You got to kill him. So to some extent, Solomon is doing what his father told him to do, which is kill Yoav. And he just did. Done. And he's buried. He's given a burial, with his family. It says in the midbar, in the wilderness. But it says his home. It's not like he's thrown out of the wilderness. It says that whatever home he had outside of, back in Judah land, he's buried back there. It's not like he's thrown out of the wilderness. It says at his home in the wilderness. So he had a summer home, or a winter home, I should say, and probably out in a warmer climate, out in the desert. He's buried out of Palm Springs, if you will. And that's the end of Yoav.
In his place, the king appointed Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, over the army, and in place of Abiatar, the king appointed the priest Zadok. Then the king summoned Shimei and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and stay there. Do not ever go out from there anywhere else.
Yeah, so Shimei is this other guy that was supposed to be killed, according to David. David had given Solomon orders to get rid of these people. And Shimei is clearly somebody very powerful. He's powerful enough that if you kill him, people will notice. He's probably like a warlord, the equivalent of like a warlord. He's popular guy, popular enough that David and Solomon don't kill him. yet. And Solomon basically says to him, build a house in Jerusalem, stay here where I can see you, and you're never allowed to leave. Don't ever leave. Because if you go outside of here, you're dead. So he warns him. You leave, you die. You can pretty much guess what's going to happen. You maybe not guess how it's going to happen, but you pretty much going to guess what's going to happen. So he's put under orders. You do not leave here.
On the very day that you go out and cross the Wadi Kidron, you can be sure that you will die. Your blood shall be on your own head. That is fair, said Shimei to the king. Your servant will do just as my lord the king has spoken. And for a long time, Shimei remained in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and that's kind of a clue.
Kind of a
clue. That
little foreshadowing there.
he's not going to do that.
Right.
And look, there's not a lot about this guy, but he was powerful enough that he had to be accounted for. And again, Solomon says you cross the city limits, which is the Wadi Kidron, this Kidron Valley, the river bed there. You cross that, you're dead, and it's on you. I gave you a warning. I gave you a chance. You do it, it's on you.
3 years later, 2 slaves of Shimei ran away to King Achish, son of Maacah of Gath. Shimei was told, your slaves are in Gath. Shimei thereupon saddled his ass and went to Achish in Gath to claim his slaves, and Shimei returned from Gath with his slaves. Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and back, and the king summoned Shimei and said to him, did I not adjure you by the Lord and warn you? On the very day that you leave and go anywhere else, you can be sure that you will die. And did you not say to me, it is fair, I accept? Why did you not abide by the oath before the Lord and by the orders which I gave you? The king said further to Shimei, you know all the wrong which you remember very well that you did to my father David. Now the Lord brings down your wrongdoing upon your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. The king gave orders to Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck Shimei down, and so he died. Thus the kingdom was secured in Solomon's hands.
Yeah, and so Solomon killed the 3 people that King David told him to, plus Adoniah. Well, he didn't kill all 3 of them, but he killed the people that he was warned about. And so the words are now that the kingdom was secured in Solomon's hands. Remember, we read just at the beginning of this, right? That when the last thing we read, it was when King David slept with his fathers. It says Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. Seems as though it wasn't quite as firmly established as it is now. And so there's a level of now being firmly established that really wasn't then. And the words are different. When it says, and his rule was firmly established, it says, Vatikon malchuto me'od, which me'od means very, very much so. And the sense was that it is firmly established is the word tikon, that it's, and malchuto is obviously malchut, right? The kingship, right? But the words that are used here was v'hamamlacha nachuna b'yad Shlomo. The king was secured in Solomon's hands. And it's a slightly different word. The word nachuna is similar to tikon, that it's the word we use for, we say correct. We say nachon, means yes, assured. But the words here that are added are beyad Shlomo, in his hands, which seems to imply that he's now taken power. And I would use that phrase more than it was in his hands, that he's now taken power. Because it's one thing to say he's the king, and people say, oh, he's the king. But now he's taken power himself in his own hands, by his own might, with his own actions now. It isn't his father that's made him king. He's made himself king. And he's done that by obliterating the opposition, by killing Adoniah, his older brother, someone who claimed by his own words that he deserved to be king, that now Solomon is king. And that's the end of chapter 2. That's the way chapter 2 ends. So it begins with David dying, and it ends with now not just that David has given the throne to Solomon, but Solomon has taken the throne. And that's the way I would look at this, is that Solomon has taken the throne. It was given to him, but now he's taken it. But he's taken it by killing people. It wasn't necessarily anything other than obliterating the opposition and killing people, and violently killing people. And in some cases, maybe even overstepping the bounds of how you kill people by killing them in the tabernacle. But he has most assuredly sent the message that he means business. And so what we know about Solomon so far is that he's capable of doing violence. He's shown, I would say, some foresight and some wisdom, right? He's shown some compassion, right? He's shown that he's capable of giving people a chance, you would say. Letting them hang themselves is also another way of saying it. But he's shown himself to be, at least the way it's been set up, that he's smart enough to know what he needs to do in order to stay in power, and he's willing to go to those lengths in order to stay in power. But that's all we really know about him so far. Now we're going to read some critical parts of who he is. And these are where we start to see Solomon today. Again, this first part, we've seen this, his ability to eliminate the rivals. We now see a little bit more of who he is as a person worthy of being king, not just because he's capable of killing people, but that he seems to also have some values. So let's take a look at Solomon as king.
Solomon allied himself by marriage with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He married Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David to live there until he had finished building his palace and the house of the Lord and the walls around Jerusalem. The people, however, continued to offer sacrifices at the open shrines, because up to that time, no house had been built for the name of the Lord.
Yep. So a couple of things in those verses. First of all, Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh. And that's obviously pretty significant. To make Pharaoh your ally would have been considered kind of the height of a power couple, a power marriage. Marrying the Pharaoh's daughter means that Pharaoh respects him enough to give him one of his daughters. But it's pretty significant. And it also, for those of us who read the Bible and who were with us last Wednesday night as we read the story of Moses, when Moses is taken out of the water, he's taken out of the water by Beth Pharaoh. Now that's a title. Pharaoh's daughter is a title. But for those of us, again, when we read the Bible and we see these words pop up, that Beth Pharaoh is now here as Solomon's wife. It's pretty significant that Pharaoh's daughter has now been taken by the king. Because the same words are essentially used in the Torah in Exodus. When Pharaoh's daughter takes Moses, it's her taking Moses, but it's the same phrase, Vayikach et bat Paro. When Pharaoh's daughter is taken, is very similar in Hebrew to when Pharaoh's daughter took. So it sounds very similar. And the words are evocative of almost coming full circle, which is at one point the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt, that this one boy was rescued by the Bat Paro, and now a Bat Paro is given in marriage to the king, one of his relatives. Significant. It's evocative. It's pretty powerful for people who had this connection to Egypt. And he brings her to the city of David, and they're living there until, as it tells us right here, he had finished building his palace and the house of the Lord and the walls around Jerusalem. So there's 3 building projects that are alluded to here, which we have not seen, but we're going to see. That Solomon doesn't just kill people, as we're going to see today and next week. He also builds. He's a big builder. And the things he's going to build are his palace, the royal palace, the house of the Lord, and the walls around Jerusalem. Now, those are not the walls around Jerusalem that are there today, which were built by the Ottoman Turks about 500 years ago. But they do follow a layout, or at least in some places, of those walls that were probably built by Solomon 500 years before Jesus, and it still existed during the time of the Romans, some of those walls, or some of those city walls of Jerusalem. So the Ottomans built much more extensive walls. And that would have been 2,500 years after Solomon. But still, these are significant things that he did. And he hasn't done them yet. And so we do know that he hasn't done them yet when this is being done, or at least these things haven't been done, but they will be done. And to some extent, why are they being done? Why is this, especially this house of the Lord, need to be built? Because people are offering up sacrifices at all the open shrines around the country. Because there is no central place to offer up. Now, we do know there's a tabernacle. The tabernacle existed for the last 200 years, ever since Joshua brought the people into the land after Moses died. The tabernacle has gone to a few different places. And people have offered sacrifices there. But they've not only offered sacrifices there, but they've also offered them on these altars, these mizbeach, these mizbachim, the plural for mizbeach, for altars. They're altars around the country. They're bamot, they're shrines, and they are high places that are being offered, where people are offering up sacrifices to God. But there's no central place. No central place.
And Solomon, though he loved the Lord and followed the practices of his father David, also sacrificed and offered at the shrines. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the largest shrine. On that altar, Solomon presented 1,000 burnt offerings.
So this altar at Gibeah, or Gibeon, actually, it's not Gibeah, it's Gibeon.
Gibeon.
It's the same root, but it's a different place. Was the largest. So the largest shrine was not where the altar is, where the
Tabernacle is.
Tabernacle was, where Yoav had gone to, the place where the ark is kept. It wasn't there. So whatever other altars they had, in some cases they were bigger than the altar that was there in the tabernacle. So that tells you that these shrines were pretty important. And there's this understanding here, right, that the priests who wrote this, because remember, there are the priests who wrote this have an agenda, which is let's make Jerusalem the capital. But they recognize that Solomon did not do that. He wants to do it. He's going to do it. He's going to do the right thing, but he wasn't doing the right thing. Because even though he was a good guy and he loved God, he loves God. He loves the Lord. And he's good like David in the sense that he roughly follows the Torah, I guess. I mean, David definitely takes some liberties, it seems like, with the Torah to some extent, but he has a sense of trying to do the right thing. He's not operating always out of just what he wants to do. And remember, David does admit when he makes a mistake. But what these guys are all doing is they're offering sacrifices. They're not all doing, but David and Solomon, and assumedly other people too, are offering sacrifices there. And it says Solomon went to Gibeon and did all these things, all these sacrifices. It was huge. 1,000 burnt offerings. That's a big offering.
At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I grant you?" Solomon said, "You dealt most graciously with your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in integrity of heart. You have continued this great kindness to him by giving him a son to occupy his throne, as is now the case."
Wow. So let's finish this vision. Well, actually, let's just say one thing. So he offers the sacrifices at Gibeon. And that's pretty nice. I mean, that he did the sacrifices, right? But he actually gets rewarded in that God appears to Solomon at night in a dream. It's not like he just comes to him and talks to him in broad daylight and whatever, but he has a dream. And of course, this is coming to Solomon, which means this would have been Solomon's accounting of it, because no one saw it. He didn't go tell somebody, "Hey, God just talked to me." He said, God came to me in a dream. And God said, "What can I give you?" Almost like a genie, right? Except he only gets one wish. What can I grant you? What can I give you? What would you like, right? What can I give to you? And so Solomon's response is, keep going. Thanks.
Okay. "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am a young lad with no experience in leadership. Your servant finds himself in the midst of the people you have chosen, a people too numerous to be numbered or counted. Grant then your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between good and bad. For who can judge this vast people of yours?"
Okay. So Solomon says to God, "You've given me this great thing. You made me king after my father David," which, by the way, as we've seen, let's not take for granted, right? He is a dark horse candidate for this. So he says, "You've already given me this great miracle, right? You've given me this ability to lead the people." And he says, "I'm your servant." And he humbles himself. He says, "Look, I'm just a kid. I don't have any experience." And he's very, very, very smart in the way he talks to God here, which is that he recognizes that his job as a leader is to help lead the people and to judge the people, to help know what he should do to be a leader, to make good decisions. And so he says to God, give me a lave, give me, and again, your servant, give your servant a lave that will be able to know and to hear, literally to hear judgment, and to know, lahavin, to be able to distinguish, to have discernment between the good and the bad, so that I can judge, so that I can be this arbiter for the people, so I can know what to do for the people. what's interesting about this is it seems based on what his job description would be, based on what he says, is his job is really to decide and to judge for the people, which seems to me to be more like a judge, like a Supreme Court kind of person, the head of the Supreme Court, if you will, than it is to be a ruler from the standpoint of making political decisions. It seems as though his job is to really be the final kind of decider on things. That's an interesting understanding of what he thought his job was.
Well, isn't that what was it Absalom was doing? You know, people would bringing their cases to David,
Yep.
and Absalom would intercept them and say,
Yep.
"Oh, David hasn't got time, but I can hear you."
Yep. David doesn't have the ability to
It
do
doesn't
this.
seem like David cared for that part of the job.
Maybe, and again,
Maybe Absalom was pulling
maybe
the last
Absalom was
one.
just saying he wanted to do it now and he was better
Yeah.
at it. But it's interesting that again, this seems to be what Solomon feels, and again, what maybe they were supposed to do. Now, look, we know that David leads the people into battle several times with with their enemies, right? He has to do that.
Well, we don't have stories about the judgments of David, really, do we?
No, and it seems as though, David was very effective in his policies, his foreign policies. We really don't know much about David's domestic policy. We really don't. We do know that, he was able to stay in power for a long time and was able to keep the tribes together, even though they don't seem to always want to be together. And so we don't really hear about his judgments. But at least Solomon seems to be thinking that's what he's got to do. And he recognizes that, look, he says, my father David walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in integrity of heart. And again, the only problem with integrity of heart, I would say, is that this is the translation from Yesharat Lev, which could be understood as integrity is a great translation, but Yashar means righteous, upright, being upright. But you translate Lev here as heart, and you translated Lev here as mind. And again, we know Bechol Levavcha, with all our heart, and we also translate it as maybe mind. And now there's translations that use heart/mind. But it's interesting that Lev will sometimes be translated as heart and sometimes as mind within just a couple of lines of each other. I'm not really, I get it in the sense that, being upright and being translates the word yashar here as integrity, which is a good, I like the translation. It's definitely the meaning of it. But it's interesting that integrity was seen as an emotional component, whereas discernment here, which is definitely what he's talking about here, is understanding mind, is why it's translated here in this idea, the havin, to discern, which we would consider that to be more mental. But these words are kind of used in Hebrew, and when we come up with translations with them, it's a little tougher for us to do it. And again, maybe because we see the heart and mind as being separate things back then, and they clearly don't. I mean, they see it as either, again, literally the organ of making good decisions and being showing an integrity and showing this kind of both emotional and intellectual intelligence that we don't really have a word for in English. But this is a person, he's basically saying to God, I want to have the integrity of my father. I want to have good judgment. And he seems to, at least though, I would say, imply that his father did have that. Or again, his father had qualities that made him fit to be king. So, and fit to be king, again, seems to be the ability to make good decisions. And so what Solomon did is he said to God, if I could ask for one thing, I'd want to be able to be a good leader, somebody who can decide things the right way. And he says, because look, it's a tremendous task to do this. How can I lead the people? And what's beautiful is the way that he addresses God. These are your people. He doesn't say they're my people. And so he recognizes, and you can see this level of sophistication on Solomon's part, even as a young man, even as he's saying, I'm young, I'm inexperienced. But look at how wise he is to say to God, they're your people. They're your people. And he, of course, asks for the right thing. He asks for a great thing, exactly what God wants to hear. Because here's what God's response is.
The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. And God said to him, because you asked for this, you did not ask for long life. You did not ask for riches. You did not ask for the life of your enemies, but you asked for discernment in dispensing justice. I now do as you have spoken. I grant you a wise and discerning mind. There has never been anyone like you before, nor will anyone like you arise again. And I also grant you that which you did not ask for, both riches and glory all your life, the like of which no king has ever had. And I will further grant you long life if you will walk in my ways and observe my laws and commandments, as did your father David.
So lots of good news here for King Solomon that came in his vision at night, which is God's very happy with his answer. And he says to him, you asked for the right thing because you didn't ask for the things that kings would normally ask for, right? You didn't ask for power and power over your enemies and long life and riches. You asked for what you need to have as king, which is a good head on your shoulders. You asked for that. I will give you that. But I'm also going to give you things that you didn't ask, the things you didn't ask for, that most kings would ask for. I'm going to give you those things. And everything will be good. And you'll even get that last thing, a long life, if you do the right thing, if you make the right decisions, and if you do follow my commandments. So in dispensing judgment, I'll give you this stuff. But what I'm not going to give you, what I can't essentially give you, because it's up to you, is if you do the right things in your life, if you make the right decisions in your own personal behavior, which is interesting because we know that that's maybe Solomon's weakness. His personal behavior seems to be his weakness. Well, I won't ruin it for you. But one of the things you might know about Solomon is that he was married to 1,000 people, 1,000 women. So that's not considered to be a good thing. But the rabbis, when we get to this issue, and you ask, what do the rabbis think about King Solomon? They have to deal with the fact that King Solomon, at least according to what the Bible says, has things that no other king ever had or ever will have. There'll never be anybody like you. There's never been anyone like you, and there'll never be anybody like you. And so when the rabbis write about King Solomon, they go nuts because he's wealthier than anybody who ever lived. He's like King Midas. He just brings in riches all the time. He brings in wealth to the country like it never had. He is wise beyond all levels that anybody ever had before. He's like Dr. Doolittle. He can talk to the animals. The animals, we read about him in our Midrash class. He has the ability to talk to animals, to spirits, to demons, to angels. He understands every language ever. He knows everything that there is to know. He has powers over demons. He has powers like no other king would ever have. He becomes literally the embodiment of power in this world. power over this world, power over the next world, that he becomes literally the example of, if you will, magic. And in Masonic traditions, there is nobody more powerful than Solomon. Solomon is the highest. Solomon is the ultimate embodiment of what a human can do in this world in Masonic tradition. In magic, the sign of Solomon, the seal of Solomon, can protect people from demons. It can order demons around. His levels of power, because of this dream that he has with God and these powers that he's granted, he becomes in the Midrash literally like a superhuman person. Now, he's always got human qualities, and again, we know he has human deficiencies. He also appears in the Midrash as somebody whose hubris gets the better of him, and his boasting and his arrogance ends up being a downfall to him. And he actually, in the Midrash, goes through a period of being thrown out of the palace, if you will, which is all based on, again, this idea that he lost power because of his hubris, but he does come back. He does get a chance to come back. None of this is in the Bible, but it's all hinted at by this. Basically, what he does is he tries to take power over the chief demon, Asmodeus, and Asmodeus ends up getting the best of him, and he shapeshifts. Asmodeus shapeshifts into looking like Solomon and rules as Solomon for some time, while Solomon has to go out and become like a beggar and get it back to the kingdom. It's like a fairy tale of losing everything and then having to reclaim it. But these wonderful midrashim legends about Solomon are just extensive, and they also fall into the world of other traditions, as we said, in Masonic tradition and in magic, some magic. And by the way, in Islam, Solomon is considered to be kind of the example of being a powerful king, which is why one of the most powerful Ottoman leaders was Suleiman the Magnificent. Solomon, he had Solomon's name. So Suleiman in Arabic is Solomon, Shlomo in Hebrew, which has at its root the word shalom, which means peace, but it also means wholeness. It means completeness, right? It means he had everything. He had everything you could want. Riches, glory, long life, conditional, but he also, of course, had this discernment. And this is what we're going to finish with today. This wonderful illustration of Solomon's brilliance, his brilliant mind.
Then Solomon awoke. It was a dream. He went to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented offerings of well-being, and he made a banquet for all his courtiers. Yeah, so he had this great dream. He woke, he knew it was a dream, but God spoke to him. He's very excited. By the way, look what he does. Now that he's got a good head on his shoulders, he offers sacrifices in the place that he's supposed to offer sacrifice, in front of the ark. He offers burnt offerings and presents offerings in the place he's supposed to be. So there's a little thing here, which I want to just point out to you because it is important. Of all the great things that Solomon does and Solomon will get, what Solomon did once he had a little bit of wisdom, the priest wants you to know, is he went to the right place to offer sacrifices. So he went to Gibeon to offer the sacrifices in the first place. That's where he had this dream. But what does he do? He then goes to the right place and offers sacrifices. He goes to the ark. Now, let's get to the story. So he did one thing already, I just want to point out. But this part is the really famous part of what Solomon does once he has discernment. So he asks for it. The Bible tells us God grants him, this wish, right? And now let's see it in action. Later, 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The first woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. On the third day after I was delivered, this woman also gave birth to a child. We were alone. There was no one else with us in the house, just the two of us in the house.
Yeah. Now, this is a very famous story of the Bible. You might have heard this story when you were a little kid. Solomon's wisdom with the two women standing before him. You'll see it now in the actual text. So again, this happens right after God gives them the ability to have discernment, to have wisdom. So this is the setup, right? This is now, why this happens when it happens. This scene with the two women. Now, I will tell you that when you're a kid and you hear this story, it's
a little scary.
It's very scary, but I will also tell you, at least when I first heard the story as a kid, I heard that it was two women who had a kid, who each had a kid, and
They don't tell you in Sunday school that they were
prostitutes. Exactly. They're just two women, which if you think about it.
But that explains why there's no guys in the house.
Yes, it also explains why they both are living in the same area. Like when you're a kid, you don't really necessarily ask that question, but it is a little weird. I mean, I did kind of think to it. I might have asked somebody, and somebody might have just said, "Oh, well," I'm saying somebody, whoever taught this to me in the first place, they were both married to the same guy. I think that would have been the easy way of answering it, which is back in those days, Solomon was married to lots of women, and other people. David was married to lots of women. Jacob wasn't married to lots of women, but he was married to 4 women. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably how it was explained to me. But the words are right here. They're nashim zonot. They are prostitutes. That is their job. So understand that these aren't just like loose women who, whatever. These are not women who were sleeping around. No, it says that was their job, and they lived in a house together. Now, it says there was no one else in the house. So were these two women in a room, in a house? Did they share a house of prostitution? Was this, was it a small house of prostitution? There was 2 women working in the house. Was this a house? Was it literally? I mean, I just want you to understand, it's very possible that they were there, either, they were freelanced, in the sense that they did what they did in their house, in this house. We don't know enough about prostitution in this period to know exactly what was happening with the business layout that they had, but it could be that these are 2 women that are literally sharing a house together or sharing a room together, and that's what they did in this house. Maybe there was 2 bedrooms in the house and they shared a kitchen, but they're very, both of them are very clear. There's nobody else that this, like, it's just them, and that's critical to the story because that's just the 2 of them. Nobody else is involved.
No witnesses.
There's nobody who could have seen this. There's nobody who was involved in this. There's no one else who could have had access to these kids. That's it. So within a couple of days of each other, they both had babies. Now, again, maybe a little different the way the story was first told to you, but this is what the story says, literally. Okay.
During the night, this woman's child died because she lay on it. She arose in the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant was asleep, and laid him in her bosom, and she laid her dead son in my bosom. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, it was not the son I had born.
Now, again, the rabbis have a problem with this story because they don't like the whole idea that these are prostitutes and that prostitutes are working
In Jerusalem.
while under King David and King Solomon's watch. They don't like the fact this is going on because the Bible says you're not supposed to give your daughters over to prostitution. So, this is a problem by itself. Who are these women? But again, based on this story, the women, how they were there and how they got there is obviously not the point. That's not the importance here. But we do have to consider the fact that this is a horrific scene in the sense that what's being claimed was that a woman unintentionally killed her son. She says she didn't mean to. She laid on her child and killed it, which happened. It did happen. It was not uncommon in those days when they didn't have cribs and things like that, that people would lay on their children and unintentionally kill their child. But what she did was she switched the babies. And again, when they're little infants and they're just days old, this could happen. This could have happened. Did it happen? I don't know. We don't know for sure. But this story is, again, supposed to be, well, let's read the story.
The other woman spoke up. No, the live one is my son and the dead one is yours. But the first insisted, no, the dead boy is yours, mine is the live one. And they went on arguing before the king. The king said, one says, this is my son, the live one, and the dead one is yours. And the other says, no, the dead boy is yours, mine is the live one. So the king gave the order, fetch me a sword. A sword was brought before the king. And the king said, cut the live child in two and give half to one and half to the other. But the woman whose son was the live one pleaded with the king, for she was overcome with compassion for her son. Please, my lord, she cried, give her the live child, only don't kill it. The other insisted, it shall be neither yours nor mine, cut it in two. Then the king spoke up, give the live child to her, he said, and do not put it to death. She is its mother. When all Israel heard the decision that the king had rendered, they stood in awe of the king, for they saw that he possessed divine wisdom to execute justice.
Yeah. So King Solomon demonstrated his discernment, the thing that he had asked for, to understand things. The people heard his decision and they said, oh my, we got a king. Now, let's talk about a couple things here. The first is, Solomon shows his wisdom by testing the mother, right? Figuring out which mother is the right one. They didn't have genetic tests in those days, so he has to test them, and he does devise a test in order to see it. As one of my rabbis much later on, when I was in rabbinical school, pointed out when we read the story only works if people actually believe that Solomon was going to cut a baby in two. So if he's capable of doing that, then we got a problem here, by the way, too, which is that people would actually believe that a king could cut a baby in two. The mothers did. So that tells you that it's a pretty scary thing. The story doesn't work unless he could actually do this. So that's scary. That's a frightening thing, that he could have done that. Again, it doesn't work unless he can say that. When you read this as a kid, you learn, oh, you know what? If you test people and you can find a way to really see whether they're telling the truth or not, that's really, really clever. I'm going to catch them. Yeah, but usually you can't do it with the threat of killing a baby. That's what he just did. He threatened to kill a baby. So again, there's something scary about that. you can't, we can't do that, in our courts. We can't, a judge, when a judge has a he said, she said thing, can't say, oh, well, just kill the baby. We'll kill a baby and then, that's the way, or we'll kill the, I mean, I don't even know what the equivalent would be. If two people came and said that the dog was theirs, right? And you went and said, oh, we'll just kill the dog and cut it in half and see, we'll give you each a half. You couldn't even do that in America. But you can in an absolute dictatorship, a monarchy, you can do that. You can get away with this. So this is scary. That's a scary thing to think about. But of course, the point of the story is to tell us that Solomon just proved that he had this amazing understanding of this amazing wisdom, and that the king now has the ability to figure stuff out and to render judgment, la'asot mishpat, to do justice, to execute justice. Now, execute justice here is interesting choice of words because he was about to execute a baby. I don't know if I'd use the word execute here, but la'asot mishpat literally means to do justice. Mary, what does the King James say? La'asot mishpat. To render judgment or something?
It says, okay, we're looking at
The
28.
last two words of the chapter.
To do judgment.
Do judgment is the literal translation. So I don't know, to do judgment is a wonderful translation, but to execute judgment seems to be at least humorous when we just read. La'asot would be, I would maybe just say to render judgment, or to dispense justice, we could also say. But again, we do say to execute justice, but again, execute oftentimes means to literally to kill somebody. But the people have faith in their king now. They feel that they have a king who possesses divine wisdom, which is the translation of the word Chachmat Elohim, the wisdom of God, which is probably what the King James says, right? The wisdom of God. Mary, does it say God's wisdom?
Or they saw the wisdom of God.
Yeah. And this seems to be like a thing, right? This guy has God's wisdom. And so they have faith in their king now. It literally says they stood in awe of their king, which some people have also pointed out they're in awe of their king who could kill a baby if he wanted to. But no, he didn't have to. But one could claim again that he exposed the true mother by his willingness to do this. I will say, by the way, that one of the things that people look, you could understand this to not be necessarily literally give me a sword, which seems to imply that he's going to cut the baby. Right? He orders it cut, but the fact is he knows what's going to happen. He says the child is, cut the live child in two. By the way, he doesn't say cut the dead child in two and give half to each,
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out, he does say the live child, so lest you think that his solution was to give half of a dead baby to each parent. He's he's able to expose the truth. And again, that's the takeaway, obviously, from, I mean, that's what we've traditionally taken away from this story. But I will say that there is a sense in this that, only because to some extent that Solomon asked for this power, that he has it. The story really doesn't exist on its own. It's part of this chapter, which is Solomon asking for divine wisdom, which is what he gets. And it's proven now. And so he asks for it and it's proven. So the stories really are important to be read together. It's not just the story of how smart Solomon is and let's see it in action. He asked for this and God gave it to him. This is a divine gift. And he's proven that he has the divine gift. Listen, it's a wonderful example of somebody asking for the right thing, getting the right thing when he shows his discernment in what to ask God for, not to ask for more power, but to ask for wisdom. And again, I think it's illustrative to extent, like none of us are going to be king, but we all pray, we all have a chance to kind of ask God for things. And again, this is really not just praying to God, but actually asking for something. And what would we ask God for if God gave us a wish? What would we ask God for? What would we ask God for? And the lesson from this is really to ask for the gift that would really give us not necessarily wealth and riches and even long life, but to be able to make good decisions, and with whatever time we have, to be able to make the good calls, and to be able to know what we should do. Because again, a lot of times we don't. A lot of times, even in our lives, when we're not making judgments on behalf of a whole kingdom, we have to make judgments that have effect on our lives and on the people we care about. And it's really hard sometimes to know what's the right decision. Sometimes, making a decision simply based on, love and based on wanting to do the nice thing isn't the right call. Sometimes it's making a hard call and practicing tough love or not taking the easy road, and sometimes, having to put off immediate gratification or even an immediate solution. Sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes we have to have patience. And again, sometimes that comes down to whether we should go out and join with people in a public event in the midst of illness, or sometimes it has to do with the way we take care of our kids, or take care of people we care about. But all of us, I think, really want to be able to make good decisions that are going to help be life affirming and have good consequences down the road, and not just in the near term. And by the way, I'd like to really know whether to buy or sell stock today. I don't. It's really bad. It's really bad time. It's in the midst of a bear market. What to do? Where should our assets be right now? We have lots of decisions to make. We're going to have some important decisions to make in a few months when we head to the ballot box and actually get to choose our leaders, because thankfully in this country, we don't have to worry about absolute dictatorships, at least not as of yet. And as long as we don't have them, we better figure out how to make sure we continue to be able to have the ability to make these decisions. And wherever we live, hopefully we'll, do the right thing, at least informed by these lessons of the Torah and the Bible. So I want to thank Rosemary again for executing justice today and giving us.
Hopefully justice survived.
giving this, but man, we have some big decisions to make as Americans and as people who live in California and live again in a weird time. which again, let's make good decisions. All of us hopefully get with discernment and with divine wisdom. So thank you everybody for being here, and stay healthy. Everybody make good decisions when it comes to keeping yourself.
Make good choices.
Make good choices.
Make good choices.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.